Good morning, everyone. It's your favorite idol, Claire Summers. And I have the honor of welcoming you all to the annual Big Climb Festival. Woohoo! I see a lot of new faces in the crowd today. So, I'm going to get you up to speed on what this fest is all about. Our friend Tari the tree bear has challenged us to climb to the top of his home, the Big Taro tree, a tradition that's been with us since the founding of this wonderful city. Everyone is welcome to participate, so I hope to see some serious challengers this year.
It's always nice for big community events such as these to bring everyone together for some good wholesome fun. Whether it be festivals, parades, live shows, or in this case, a contest of endurance where normal people are attempting to scale up a tree the size of a mountain. In the grand scheme of things, this really shouldn't be so surprising. Since the dawn of man, we have strived to push ourselves beyond our limits, to prove to the universe that humanity is the peak of God's creations. Whenever we encounter an obstacle that's deemed too impossible, I can guarantee you there are at least one or two brave individuals who believe they can overcome it. This can range from a couple of lads doing straight line missions across the country at the risk of getting shot by farmers, or a bloke touring the world to demolish food challenges, much to the shock and horror of the local patrons. A famous example would have to be Mount Everest, or to a lesser extent, Mount Fuji. Many people have always dreamed to conquer these gigantic wonders. It's about the challenge in the end, to demonstrate our athletic ability and proudly display the never-ending potential of the human spirit. So when people see a giant tree, of course our first instinct is to climb it. So far, within the hundreds of years since this tradition has started, no one has managed to reach the top, with the one only casualty being the founder of this very city, who ironically passed away during his first attempt at this challenge. If there is one way to outdo yourself discovering a tree of this magnitude, then it's to die to it. Fast forward to now, and the real winners happen to be the spectators, vendors, sponsors, and most importantly, the insurance companies. While winning is definitely a nice goal to achieve, it's ultimately about the spectacle, a trait that a lot of game shows have fully embraced. Growing up in the 90s, I was treated to all kinds of fun and crazy competitions, where the average Joe could participate for a chance to win, with a lot of us in the audience cheering on for their success. But for the most part, we're also there to watch them fail in hilariously spectacular ways. There's nothing more fun than watching a plucky underdog flail and bounce around for our entertainment. Of course, no one can do this insanity better than Japanese television, with its most famous example being Takeshi's Castle. First aired in 1986, the game show would pit 100 contestants against the fiendish Count Takeshi and his devious army, the Emerald Guard. Along the way, they have to contend with an array of physical challenges that are designed to break your spirit and your body. For those with enough fortitude to make it through the muck, they will eventually have a chance to storm the titular castle and end Count Takeshi's reign once and for all. A program that originally started off as a time slot filler that ended up taking the world by storm. Thanks to its creative premise, crazy games and colourful characters, the TV viewing audience were treated to a game show that brought out their inner child. When it broke into the international market during the 90s to early 2000s, it became a gateway into not just Japanese variety shows, but Japanese media in general, cementing its place in pop culture history. So on today's episode of Doc Discovers, I'll be diving into the history of its creation, the team who brought it to our screens, its cultural impact, its dedicated fan base, as well as its eventual revival. What you're currently watching is footage from the 1980s Japanese television program The Endurance. It was a show where teams of university students would compete against each other on who can withstand the most unpleasant experiences known to man. This can range from standing inside a glass cage under the blistering summer heat for a prolonged length of time, to drinking an entire bottle of hot sauce while inhaling wasabi through your nostrils. Whoever is the last man standing may be the winner, but at the cost of their own dignity. This could be the first instance of a game show pushing their contestants to their absolute limits for our entertainment. But much to my surprise, not many people knew of this game, and it's somewhat lost to the sands of time. So how did someone like me, who grew up in the 90s, know about this little gem? Well, it's thanks to a show called On TV that ran on late night British television. It was a program that looked over clips of TV shows and advertisements from around the world, while its host would provide some snarky commentary. Excuse me, I just had a moment of self-realization here. At the time, it was hosted by stand-up comedian and presenter Chris Tarrant of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire fame. But before then, he hosted Tarrant on TV, which happened to show clips of this Japanese suffering simulator. But in actuality, Tarrant wasn't the first to host this show. That honour belongs to Australian writer, broadcaster and television legend Clive James. It was through his tenure that the British public were first exposed to not just the Endurance, but Japanese media in general. Now before I move on, I want you to keep Clive James and his show in mind, because it will be relevant much later. During the 1980s, Japan was enjoying the wealthy boon that is the economic bubble, where real estate and stock market prices were greatly inflated, leading to uncontrolled spending from the public, which has unfortunately caused major stagnation in Japan's economy for decades to come. This is probably the 5th or 6th time I referenced the bubble on my channel, but it should be reiterated how much of a cultural turning point this era was for the country. You'd be surprised to learn how a majority of the Japanese media you're enjoying today either originated from or was inspired by the bubble era. The public were living the extravagant lifestyle by overindulging on fancy meals, fashionable clothing, futuristic gadgets, and most importantly, entertainment. Even television and film were taking advantage of the bubble, with variety shows being one of the most watched genres. The most famous example would have to be Hachiji-daiyo Zenin Shugo, or in English, It's 8 o'clock, gather around everyone. It was a variety show that would be performed on a stage in front of a live audience, hosted by Japanese rock and roll band and comedy troupe, The Drifters. It would air on Tokyo Broadcasting System, or TBS for short, every Saturday from 1969 to 1985, with a grand total of 103 episodes. It was pretty much the highest rated program in Japanese television history, and by just looking at its footage, I could see why it was so popular. The production value was very impressive for its time. I'm actually in awe at how they managed to keep a stage show of this caliber running so smoothly, and I highly suggest checking it out if you're interested. It just has a nice cozy vibe to it. I can imagine families huddling around their small CRT televisions to see what kind of wacky hijinks the Drifters are up to next. If you play Hideo Kojima's Death Stranding 2, you may actually come across a nice little tribute to Hachiji-daiyo Zenin Shugo, where Norman Reedus is dancing in a hot spring to one of the show's iconic songs. Even one of the members of the Drifters, Chai Kaito, makes a little cameo as well. It's quite random, I know, but I wanted to share this as an example of the show's everlasting impact. As 1985 rolled around, the show was reaching the end of its decade-long tenure, and TBS were trying to figure out its replacement. But the problem is, how on earth can you top such a cultural phenomenon? This is where producer Kunihiko Katsura comes in. He was working at TBS since 1965, and already had a couple of variety shows under his belt. Now granted, most of them were short-lived, so taking on a project such as this was going to be a huge undertaking. For the initial concept, Katsura pictured a medieval setting where an army of contestants would attempt to take over a castle. However, one other inspiration came to mind, as that comes from a man Katsura has regularly collaborated with. This man would be legendary comedian Beat Takeshi. A lot of you may know him today as the filmmaker Takeshi Kitano, who has directed some of the most iconic crime dramas to come out of Asia. His filmography includes the likes of Violent Cop, Hanabi, and Sonatine, but back then he was a very successful stand-up comedian. In my Kikujiro video, I was covering his directorial career, So this time I get to take a look at his career as a comic. He was one half of the comedic stand-up duo The Two Beats. It's where his stage name, Beat Takeshi, originated from. His comedic stylings can range from dry deadpan delivery to absurdist slapstick humour. Despite taking a much more serious direction when it comes to his films, he never once forgot where he came from. He would tend to produce a few comedy films in between his more serious works. When you watch these comedies, you pretty much get a good understanding of his sense of humour. It's definitely loopy and very far out there, and I can see people taking it as another case of, wow, isn't Japan so wacky? But what makes his work even funnier is how he tends to play it straight most of the time. Despite how juvenile a film such as Getting Any is, what makes it work is how everyone in the film takes its insanity at face value, as if it's just a normal part of everyday life. And I honestly believe it adds another layer of absurdity to Kitano's work. When it comes to the show's inception, Katsura took inspiration from Kitano's comedy group Takeshi's Army. These are a group of comedians that were mentored by Kitano himself, and have pretty much stuck with him since the 80s. They would often refer to Beat Takeshi as Lord, so Katsura thought it would be fitting to put him in a medieval setting, with the castle being the main focus. Kitano and Katsura worked together on a few short-lived variety shows before, and built up a strong relationship, so it was a no-brainer for them to collaborate on a project as ambitious as this. Kitano had the idea to produce a show that would replicate the freedom of being a child playing outside with their friends, where the only limitations would be their imagination. They would play all kinds of games, sometimes getting messy in the process, one of the key phrases being, play pretend war. He wanted to embrace this playfulness and place it on a larger scale for television. When it came to the physical challenges, Kitano drew inspiration from video games, which back then were taking the country by storm. Just a year earlier, on September 13th, 1985, Super Mario Bros. Was released on the Nintendo gaming console, the Famicom, so he wanted to adapt them into live action, to see how well the game's difficulty would translate to a real-world setting. And if you're already a fan of Takeshi's Castle, then you already know the answer to this question. Filming would take place at TBS-owned Midoriyama Studios in Yokohama. Midoriyama translates to Green Mountains, which makes a lot of sense when you look at its lush surroundings. The studio itself became a famous tourist spot thanks in part to Takeshi's Castle. For the castle's design, they pulled from all kinds of inspirations from both Western, Eastern, and even fantasy. Honestly, when I look at the castle itself, it reminds me a lot of Wily's castle from the Mega Man games. The production budget racked up to 100 million yen, which at the time made it the most expensive variety show to be produced, even during the bubble era. I wonder what contributed to the bubble bursting. The premise would have Beat Takeshi as the fiendish Count Takeshi, the demonic lord of his domain, and the main antagonist of the show. Our hero, General Tani, is tasked with rounding up the best of Japan to form a strong enough army to storm and conquer the Count's castle. However, what's awaiting them is a slew of devious traps and obstacles, and if that's not enough, they have to contend with the Count's personal army. The show itself would have up to and over 100 contestants competing in the game every week, allowing anyone who is brave enough to take part. Whoever is able to win this game would earn themselves a prize of 1 million yen. Outside of Beat Takeshi, the show would feature a large ensemble cast. Far too many to name in fact, but I will at least try to highlight a few of them. Saburo Ishikaura was played the advisor to Count Takeshi, who would later be succeeded by Sonomama Higashi midway through the show's run. He was also the original leader of Takeshi's army. The army itself was full of interesting personalities, from identical twin actors to wrestlers and famous J-pop idols like Michiru Jo, but a majority of them were members of the comedy group Takeshi's Army. If you're a fan of Kitano films, I can assure you that there's a few familiar faces here. A good example would be the great Gidayu and Rakio Ide, who both appeared in Kitano's summer movie Kikijiro. Another outlier would be Animal, played by American baseball player Braz the Animal Leslie. At the end of his major league career, he decided to play in Japan for a short while before retiring from baseball completely. He then went on to become a Japanese television personality, which is how he ended up on Takeshi's Castle. It's actually not out of the ordinary for these productions to hire athletes to play opposing figures, but Leslie's performance was just something special, so much so that Kitano eventually casted him as the character of Moose in his American-produced film, Brothers. On the side of good, General Tani, the host of this show, would be played by actor and TV presenter Hayato Tani. I personally knew him as Commander Senjuro Sagata from the tokusatsu show Hikari Sentai Maskman, which is a random aside, but when you think about it, he does fit the heroic archetype, and I can't picture anyone else in the role but him. He's always high energy, encouraging, and downright charming. There's even wholesome moments where he's trying to help the contestants, and if there's anyone I want by my side on the battlefield, it would definitely be him. Ultraman is in the cast too. No, I won't elaborate. The pilot episode of Takeshi's Castle would air on the 29th of April 1986 exclusively to one prefecture. What's interesting about this pilot is that it's quite different to the show we know today.
わからないかも柳沢慎吾君が僕の部下、そしてたけしさんが攻撃隊の隊長でちょっとやってみた。でやってみたらこれ攻撃隊の隊長やってたらいろいろ全部参加しなきゃいけなくなりますね。まあ殿もいい判断したんでしょう。やっぱ俺は上州の殿になるということで。
There's no footage of this pilot out there, and it's considered lost media. All we have are a few stills, and it's really interesting to see what this show could have been, with a couple of the more well-known games looking rather underbaked compared to the final product. I guess you could consider it one of those lost bases. While we're not able to watch this iteration of the show, we fortunately at least get to see what would happen if the roles of Tani and Takeshi were reversed. There was a special episode where Takeshi must storm Tani's castle, and to do that, he recruits a large army of kaiju. No, I won't elaborate. It's very much worth watching the original broadcast starting from episode 1, because you can see how much the team improves the production value over the course of the show, and it's very interesting to see how they try to balance these games in real time. The first episode opens with narration by long-running TBS commentator Shizo Miyauchi, where he explains that the castle is owned by Count Takeshi, and it cost him 1 million yen to build it. General Hayato Tani has recruited 100 volunteers from all over the country to help him invade the castle and show the Count who's boss. It then cuts to security footage of Takeshi's army running away from the invading force. Now, it's probably not a great start when your security isn't really doing the bare minimum to keep ordinary civilians off your land, but we're talking about a guy who built his castle on the graves of the people who died building it. You could try hiding it, my lord, but we have the video evidence. So why does General Tani want to take the castle? I actually have no idea. Funny enough, the Count himself seems utterly confused as well, but he's not too concerned. After all, the first obstacle is the dreaded wall, which ended up taking out over half of Tani's army. Though I have to point out that they could, just walk around it. There's an opening right there, just go! If one wall wasn't enough, Tani's army have to contend with yet another one, only this time there's soldiers guarding it, armed with military-grade water pistols. Not to worry though, because Tani came equally as prepared by arming his troops with the exact same weaponry. It goes to show that the weapons manufacturing industry was also eating well thanks to the bubble. The squirt guns themselves are a main staple of the series, that were used quite frequently in a lot of games, and it falls into Kitano's intention of giving us a fun and messy time. You can see both the soldiers and contestants wearing helmets with paper discs attached to them. If these discs soak up enough water, they will burst, leading to a disqualification. Much to the surprise of no one, however, these squirt guns proved to be quite ineffective, with more members of Tani's army breaking on through. But the day is still young, as this is where the real fight truly begins. From here on out, our heroes will have to overcome an array of physically demanding obstacles designed to deter them from their mission. This can range from hopping between rocks to cross a shark-infested pond, navigating a maze while being stalked by demons, taking on a literal uphill battle as they're sliding around in the mud while being bombarded by boulders, and the most toughest of all, crossing a ravine on some rope. Okay, yeah, that last one doesn't sound as impressive or daunting. This is where the meat of the show is. It's fun seeing the games you normally associate with video games be brought to life in live action. A majority of these courses would run linearly, allowing the camera to pan from side to side, evoking the feeling that you're watching someone play a game of Super Mario. I especially like the way the show introduces the games. The Count's advisor, Ishikaura, would run Takeshi through every trap they have prepared for the ongoing invasion. He even went out of his way to produce miniature sets to demonstrate the mechanics of these obstacles. Through the Count's point of view, we the audience get to learn how these games work. In this case, the first obstacle has our contestants having to swing across a pit of snakes. A lot of the humour here comes from Beat Takeshi fumbling around and pointing out, "Why don't you just kill them?" which is a fair assumption to make considering they're trespassing on his land. I really like how this is framed. It's a simple yet effective way of exposition that doesn't impede or break any immersion in the story. I have to give this team a lot of credit. It's easy to produce a straightforward game show, but instead they decide to produce a really goofy war drama in the middle of this family-friendly program. It's so absurd yet very in line with a lot of Beat Takeshi's works. To add more to this theme, they also have battlefield reporters played by Shingo Yanagisawa, who would then be succeeded by Junji Inagawa from episode 22 onwards, pretty much selling the idea that this is a bloody conflict that has no end in sight, where the real heroes are the ones who perished at the dreaded snake pit. What's curious is that when I take a glance at the pilot episode, it looks as if they were going to allow the contestants to bum rush every obstacle at once instead of one at a time. I wonder if they had to reconsider this for balancing purposes, or maybe it was easier to track what's going on, because if you look back at the previous obstacle, I have to admit it's hard to see who got disqualified or not. When it came to filming on the day, not every contestant played every game. They were relegated to maybe 3 or 4, and the production team would judge on who gets to go on to the next round based on the amount of successes a contestant would have, and I think that's a good way of managing things. The games are already tough enough, so you gotta give some leeway. On top of that, there's a lot of logistics to consider when you have over 100 contestants competing in the show. If you thought Count Takeshi's treatment of his loyal soldiers were rough, think about the ADs who have to keep tabs on everyone. Whenever I approach a piece of media, especially one that's long running, I like to keep an eye on any improvements over the course of its production. You may have noticed from my videos that I'm someone who wants to dive into the mindset of these creators and see how they tackle certain challenges that may arise. So it's really cool to see the beginnings of a lot of fan favourite games in this first episode, such as the Dragon's God Pond or the Demon's Mansion. While it's quaint to see how primitive a lot of these early games were, especially compared to later, I still say it's technically impressive for its time, and yet the production team strive to improve themselves. For example, one of the games had you crossing the ravine by rope. Yes, that's it. That's all you had to do. There was no one stopping you, and there were no traps either. If you can handle a bit of rope burn, then you're set. It's just funny to think that this was the second to last obstacle. If only the Count kept his builders alive so they would have fortified the rest of his defences. But I digress. I wanted to focus on this obstacle most especially because you can see the production team go back to the drawing board and figure out a way to make it more exciting. They didn't disregard it, instead they built upon the basic concept. They eventually replaced the rope with a bridge, and the contestants had to carry a ball across while Takeshi's army would be shooting cannonballs at them. This eventually became the iconic game known as the Strait of Gibraltar, or Bridge Ball in English. So great, they solved the problem. But then they decided it was too easy, and added more obstacles to the bridge itself. Get used to seeing that, by the way. At the end of the first episode, we're left with 3 contestants who have the overwhelming task to storm the castle, fight through Takeshi's army, and take out the Count once and for all. Once again, they're utilising the water pistol paper disc mechanics from earlier to decide the victor. But from one glance at this showdown, you can already come to the conclusion that the contestants are at a heavy disadvantage. It certainly doesn't help that they're stuck with puny water pistols while Takeshi's army has a full-blown water cannon. I get it, this is the final boss, but considering how few contestants made it to the end, it does feel like they're rubbing salt into the wound.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
So once again, the team had to go back to the drawing board and found a more fairer solution. They decided to forego the castle assault for a kart battle. Both sides are now fighting on even ground, with Count Takeshi driving around on the biggest cart. They still stuck with the water pistols until eventually they replaced it with a laser tag system, which probably made things easier to manage. Same rules as before, you need to hit the Count's target to win. So great, they fixed another issue. But then they decided this was too fair, so they stuck the Count on an airplane. The amount of whiplash that must be going on behind the scenes must be a sight to behold. The film crew were already having a hard time maintaining every aspect of the production, and now you want to put your main star on a crane-mounted plane? Is that even safe? Okay, maybe I'm asking too much. After the absolute slaughter of our heroes, the first episode ends in failure, with General Tani stating that the 3 remaining members of his army were killed very easily, which is not really installing any confidence whatsoever. The general goes on to inform the audience that he's now recruiting eager volunteers who are willing to take the fight to the Count, all before running away crying in tears. Meanwhile, the Count himself gets to enjoy his castle for another day. It's a really strong start to what will become a legendary series. If you're a fan who've only watched the Western version, I highly recommend looking this one up just to see where it all started. The show is one wild ride to another, with new games popping up throughout the course of its runtime. Overall, it had over 100 games, which is quite insane in the grand scheme of things. Now granted, some of them were either remixed or improved versions of previous games, but it's still really impressive. The original run of the show was 4 years, which, yes, is a long time, but when you consider the harsh conditions and hectic filming schedule, it's amazing how much the team were able to churn out. I think what impressed me the most is how they're consistently updating the production value. As I mentioned earlier, I really enjoy comparing older games to their updated counterparts, trying to figure out the mindset behind such changes. The way the team keeps updating the games and trying to balance everything, you could say this is the first ever instance of a live service game. Get it? Because it's a live action video game show? Yeah, I'm sorry. Now, just like any fan, I have my own list of favourite games. There are the usual picks such as Dragon God's Ponds, the many iterations of the mazes, and the roller game. The last one, I'd often like to imagine how many people had their spines snapped by this contraption. I also really like the games that involve the entire army stampeding over each other in order to qualify for the next round. But most especially, I like the more far out there games like Stab and Be Stabbed, the Pachinko inspired Can't Save the Ball, and my top on the list, Adventure Zone. The latter, you can clearly see them proudly wear their video game influences on their sleeve. And funny enough, it doesn't end there. If we listen to the background music of these original episodes, you might notice a lot of familiar tunes, because most of them are from popular arcade games at the time. In other cases, they'll use film and television soundtracks, including that of Thunderbirds and the iconic John Williams Star Wars theme. It's amazing what they were able to get away with back then. Out of all the episodes I really enjoyed, it has to be the specials, such as episode 100 that brings back the winners of the Fighting Spirit Award, more on that later. The family special where parents and child can fail and flail together, the international specials where we see contestants from around the world attempt to storm the castle, and of course the Tokusatsu fan in me especially enjoys the Kaiju special, where Beat Takeshi was kicked out of his castle by General Tani, so he decides to recruit all the monsters of the world to help him take it back. You can tell it's serious business when Tani has to get the Ultramen to help him defend. I mean, look at Takeshi's army. He even managed to recruit Slimer from the Ghostbusters. You better watch out. Who knows what Slimer is capable of? Oh. In typical Beat Takeshi fashion, he decides to cheat in the final showdown, and allows the monsters to attack on foot and swarm the carts with no restraint whatsoever. But not to worry, Tani has the support of Japan's strongest hero, Ultraman, and really? I think what the show should be most commended for is how they nailed the absolute feeling of pure unadulterated fun. It isn't just enough to put contestants through a set of crazy obstacles, they went the extra mile to build an interesting world around it. It really feels like a bunch of kids playing pretend war. Having Hayato Tani as the heroic general with Beat Takeshi as this over-the-top villain who has to put up with his bumbling sidekicks, turns the experience into a live-action Saturday morning cartoon show that families of all generations can enjoy. Even better is that everyone from every walk of life can participate. Because of these grueling obstacle courses, it actually puts everyone on an even playing field. It doesn't matter if you're a professional athlete, the roller game is bound to get you, while the plucky college student is drowning in a lake full of sharks. Even the most hardcore of gamers are bound to hit a wall too. Throughout the show's 133 episode run, there have only been 8 victories in total. But even if the episode ends in failure, there's still a chance for contestants to win the Fighting Spirit Award, normally given to those who put in the most effort or brought us the most entertainment. This came with a prize of 100,000 yen. Then, to celebrate 100 episodes of the show, they brought back every recipient of the awards to have another go at the castle. On a bit of a side tangent, I have noticed how lax they can be with their rules however. There are moments where anything could go. For example, there was one contestant who went all in on a scuba diving build, which you think would be completely useless in Takeshi's castle, but this guy was playing 4D chess. As it turns out, this build was made specifically so he can skip the entirety of the Dragon's God Pond. Outside of the games themselves, it's their difficulty that makes the show famous. A majority of the attempts you see on screen will always end in failure, where the only consolation prize are broken bones and broken spirits. Even if you manage to reach the castle to confront the Count, standing there, you realise you are just like him, trying to make history. Throughout its runtime, the show makes it a point to honour its fallen soldiers. Everyone we see compete is a warrior fighting for the cause, to get this glorified squatter and his gaudy castle off their land. Every week, hundreds of Japanese nationals would sacrifice their lives trying to fight back against the dreaded Count, with the whole world watching. The ongoing war campaign eventually gained the attention of the UN, of which have offered their own support to the general's cause. So yes, Tani had international civilians enlist as well. This was an important moment in history, because it was thanks to the efforts of Daily Planet reporter Clark Kent, whose on-the-field coverage brought worldwide attention to this internal conflict. He was even caught on film leading the charge. Unfortunately, it didn't end well for the clumsy lad, having him sent home in a stretcher. This is probably the first and last time being a journalist is seen as a respectable job. Funny enough, Superman was also spotted taking part in the assault on the very same day Clark Kent was reporting on it. Which is an odd coincidence, I have to say. Unfortunately, what the Man of Steel didn't take into account was that the castle was built upon a reserve of kryptonite. Early on, I mentioned the TV presenter Clive James and how he would show clips of the Japanese media to the British public. Well, his fascination with the country eventually landed him in a documentary that followed his travels to the land of the rising sun. But it wasn't just enough to experience its culture. Clive also wanted to take a shot at Takeshi's castle, which I think is a cool full circle moment for him. He appears in episode 42, which is actually quite impressive because it was also the family special, where parent and child work together to tackle the castle's infamous challenges. So he wasn't just the only foreigner competing at the time, he also counted as a one-man family. Here he is charging the wall with his fellow comrades. The Commonwealth salutes you for your service, good sir. It was a grueling conflict where soldiers were dropping like flies. It was getting so bad that Tani was forced to conscript children into his army. Not to worry though, Ultraman is there to give moral support. Wait, couldn't he just grow large and overthrow the castle? Keep in mind, this all started because Tani wanted to take the castle himself. And I have to say, he's very dedicated to the cause. I mean, I can't begrudge him, it is a nice looking castle. While it was looking dim for the Japanese public with no sign of victory on the horizon, Count Takeshi did hit a snag a few months into this war campaign. On June 10th, 1987, Takeshi Kitano was sentenced to 6 months in jail after waging war against a tabloid rag called Friday Magazine. You see, one of their journalists exposed his secret mistress, which sent Kitano into a seething rage. He rounded up members of Takeshi's army and they defaced the magazine's building. This was known as the Friday Magazine incident, a controversy that's a crazy story in on itself. Ironically, if he were to pull this stunt in today's climate, the general public would not only take his side, but they would have crowned him the Emperor of Japan. Instead, he was stuck in jail for 6 months, leaving TBS in a bit of a dilemma. How can you continue broadcasting a show called Takeshi's Castle without the titular star, Beat Takeshi? When news of the Count's arrest reached Tane's army, their morale hit new heights. This is their chance to hit the iron while it's hot. They once again stage another assault on the Count's demonic castle, but on the day of the invasion, their hopes were quickly dashed when they see Count Takeshi himself waiting for them from behind his castle walls. But how is this possible? He was just incarcerated by the police. Now this may be very hard to believe, but the man you're seeing right now is not Count Takeshi, but his body double. I'm sure this is a complete shock considering how this double looks just like him. As it turns out, the Count took one of his most loyal soldiers and transformed him into a perfect copy of himself. But it wasn't just enough to adopt his physical appearance. They also implanted powerful suggestions through induced hypnagogia. He's experienced all of Count Takeshi's stand-up routines on record, and shares all his knowledge and experience, to make him believe he is the one true Count Takeshi. He has basically become his phantom, and to think we've all fell for it. Once the Count was released after serving his time, he immediately took charge once again, with his phantom put to death for doing his job too well. At least, that's what I believed happened. In reality, Katana was banned from television because of the controversy, so the production team came up with a tongue-in-cheek way to keep the character in the show. They pretty much plopped an oversized mascot head on the guy and called him the Takeshi doll. And because the show was already really silly, it doesn't feel out of place. Funny enough, Katana would direct a film called Glory to the Filmmaker that takes a comedic look at his movie career. There's a running gag where whenever Katana had to do a stunt scene, he's suddenly replaced by a stunt doll. Considering how many deep cuts the film makes, I'd like to believe it's a callback to his replacement on Takeshi's Castle. Despite its minor setbacks, the show was a monumental success, cementing itself in Japanese pop culture. It did so well that they even produced merchandise. Want to experience the game within the comfort of your home? Then you too can play the official Takeshi's Castle board game. Even in a safer environment, you and your friends can still experience the very same bone-crushing excitement as seen on TV. Friendships will be lost as you try your best to defeat the challenging games that are made to inflict maximum pain. And just like the obstacles on the show, the board game has also seen many updated versions, suffering for the whole family. A lot of gamers will probably know Takeshi Kitano for his most infamous video game, Takeshi's Challenge, where apparently he wasn't done tormenting the many young gamers who grew up on the Famicom, because they went and released a video game version of Takeshi's Castle. Now you're probably thinking, oh, that makes sense, the show was inspired by video games after all, so it's a total full circle moment. And to that I say, yes, you are correct, but this is Beat Takeshi we're talking about here, because to play this game, it requires the infamous Nintendo Power Pad. Now you have to put in the physical labour to enjoy your relaxation time, and if you haven't suffered enough, they released a sequel. It was so hardcore that, decades after its release, it almost managed to kill comedian Shinra Arano during an episode of Game Center CX. Even a fellow comedian wasn't safe from Count Takeshi's reign. While I love to delve into the creators of such works, I'd be remiss not to highlight the fans and the community the show has garnered. In fact, a lot of the information I use to make this video is sourced from them, and goes to show that you can always count on the fanbase to keep your beloved properties alive. First off, there is a site called Takeshi's Castle History Museum, run by a dedicated Japanese fan. It's very in-depth, even going through the timeline of his production, and it's very much been a help to my research. There is actually a Western equivalent of this site, but we'll talk about it a bit more in the next chapter of this video. For now, I want to highlight a dedicated fan by the name of Joshua Murphy, who is probably the only English-speaking fan to know the original show inside and out. If you were to give him a random episode number, he will list out all the games featured on that specific episode with pinpoint accuracy. While I may know way too much about Showa-era television productions, it's actually thanks to Joshua's research that helped me fill in a lot of gaps while making this video, so I recommend checking out both of his channels. It's full of interesting trivia, as well as interviews with some of the contestants who took part in the original show. I also want you to keep his name in mind, because it will become relevant much later. Suddenly I just got a bit of deja vu. If you want to watch the original version of Takeshi's Castle, you can watch it on the Japanese side of Amazon's streaming service, Prime Video, or you can get them on physical media if you're willing to shell out a couple of bucks. I do have to put an asterisk on this though, because they did have to replace music for certain episodes for, well, obvious reasons. If you want to watch the original untampered episodes, then you can find them on the internet if you look hard enough. I'm actually pretty sure you can find some of the subtitle versions out there too, so the options are out there. Kunihiko Kasura and Takeshi Kitano had the gargantuan task to produce a variety show that will live up to the standards set by TBS's previous show, It's 8 O'Clock, Gather Round Everyone. Not only did they manage to do this within the short 4 years of its runtime, but it's also a show that will remain a timeless classic for generations to come. Most importantly, this feels like a show that was made by a group of friends who wanted to have a good time and share with the world the spirit of childlike fun. But like all good things, it eventually has to end. Takeshi's Castle ran for 133 episodes, with its final episode airing October 19th, 1990. This time the stakes are raised as General Tani has managed to recruit 1,000 contestants for one final assault. All the fan favourite games make their final appearance, and they even tie up a couple of loose plot threads. Wait, Junji the war reporter dies? The final episode actually doesn't end with a showdown at the castle. Instead, the contestants are treated to a shooting gallery where they have a chance to win themselves some cool prizes. While it's not exactly an exciting climax to end on, I think this is a really nice way to thank everyone for taking part. With that, the saga that is Takeshi's Castle comes to a close. Coincidentally, the economic bubble was about to burst around the same time, so of course Beat Takeshi had to give one last screw you to the Japanese public for continuously invading his castle over the course of 4 years. Even the Japanese economy wasn't safe from Count Takeshi's reign. But as one door closes, another opens, because as it turns out, this is only just the beginning.
Hi everyone! This is a good time to let you know that we're also broadcasting this on our official YouTube channel. If you're enjoying the show, remember to like and leave a comment. It really helps us, and if you want more content, it would be super cool if you subscribe to us too. It's totally free, and you'll get easy access to any future updates.
Huh? I didn't know this festival had a YouTube channel. It's an annual event, what kind of content would they even post? Top 10 big climb fails of 2002. LOL, he lost his wig. Ah, I see. When you look up clips of Takeshi's Castle today, you may notice that they're from a version that's different to the one I've shown earlier. Well, that's because that's the version you and the rest of the world are probably most familiar with. You see, Takeshi's Castle wouldn't hit Western shores till the early 2000s, around a decade after its original broadcast, but curiously, there was quite a bit of a journey to get to that point. While Takeshi's Castle was off the air, there was still a demand for this kind of entertainment, and fortunately, one man was brave enough to pick up the torch. This man was producer Yoshio Higuchi, a man who laughs at the face of danger and safety regulations. He is known as the father of sports variety programming, and is recognised worldwide for his most famous creation, Sasuke, or known in the West, Sasuke Ninja Warrior. Produced by TBS and filmed at the famous Midoriyama studio, Sasuke would challenge 100 competitors to attempt to complete a 4-stage obstacle course, all of them physically demanding and made to challenge your athletic ability. It debuted in 1997 and is still running to this day, with the show being just as influential as Takeshi's Castle. It's worth bringing up because Sasuke carries the DNA of Takeshi's Castle, from filming at the very same studio to its 4-stage course structure, all the way down to its camera work mimicking popular video games. However, this show is taken a little bit more seriously. It's a grueling contest to find the best that Japan has to offer, and once again, anyone can compete. Anyone can become a hero. One thing I appreciate is how this show puts heavy emphasis on its contestants, with a few of them managing to attain celebrity status, which they rightfully deserve. The feats they're able to pull off on a show such as this is incredibly impressive, and again, some of them aren't professional athletes, these are ordinary people. One of the more famous examples is Morimoto Yusuke, who's been competing since he was a teenager, and went on to become one of the most successful competitors in the show's history. Funnily enough, Sasuke was going to be a one and done special for the show Kinniku Banzuke, but TBS were bombarded by calls and letters from fans, most of them asking how they can compete in the show. After an accident on set, Kinniku Banzuke was taken off the air, which led to Sasuke spinning off into its own show. But here's a twist. Kinniku Banzuke is actually a spin-off of another one of Higuchi's shows, Sportsman No. 1. So here we have a spin-off of a spin-off. And let's not get started on the many shows that spun off from Sasuke. This episode is already going to be long enough. Instead, I'd like to recommend a YouTube channel by the name of Sasuke Nerds, who have done extensive research into each of the shows I mentioned, and they produced hour-long documentaries that are very much worth your time. I don't think you understand how hard it is to get information on these earlier works, let alone find any footage. So these guys deserve all the credit, and will do a far better job than I can ever do covering Higuchi's work. While Sasuke was on the rise, there were attempts to bring Takeshi's Castle to a wider audience outside of Japan. Around the 90s, countries like Thailand, Mexico, Spain, Malaysia and Singapore would broadcast the original show with subtitles. In Thailand's case, they dubbed the original show, and it was broadcast between 1988 to 1995. But the story didn't end there. In 2014, they ended up buying the rights to remake the show, which became known as Takeshi's Castle Thailand. And to their credit, they kept it as close to the original as they can, while throwing a few twists of their own. This will become notable later, so keep this in mind as well. Now, the UK's first exposure to Takeshi's Castle would be through a show called Tarrant on TV, the successor to Clive James on television. The audience would chortle and laugh at the clips the host, Chris Tarrant, would show and commentate over. However, there is a reason why the British public resonated so well with these clips. I'm going to throw a little twist in this story because I purposely left out a crucial tidbit from the timeline of events. We actually had our own comedy game show that predated Takeshi's Castle that went by the name of It's a Knockout, that was broadcasted in 1966, which in turn was also an adaptation of the French game show into Vilise. It was a show that featured teams representing their town or city to compete in absurd competitions. The show was described as School Sports Day for adults, which is very similar to Kitano's intentions behind the creation of Takeshi's Castle. Interestingly, when it comes to our media, the UK and Japan have had a long and extensive history. Since the 1960s, we would be trading our famous pieces of media with each other. While we in the UK would give them Jerry Anderson's Thunderbirds, in turn Japan would give us Nippon Television's adaptation of Journey to the West, Monkey Magic, both shows being very influential for future creators. Sometimes we end up collaborating with each other. A famous example would be the 1983 war drama Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, which would have been a lot of people's first exposure to Takeshi Kitano as an actor. So something like Takeshi's Castle would resonate very well with the British audience. After all, both countries tend to share the same silly sense of humour. This is where a British television channel, Challenge TV, would come into this story. It was a channel that would run classic game shows on rotation, and out of the blue they decided to broadcast Takeshi's Castle as a bit of filler between their more well-known programming. The first episode of the UK version would debut on Challenge TV on the 9th of November 2002, and it became a surprise hit, leading to the channel to commission 3 more series in 2003. This is the version that I assume a lot of you are most familiar with, and it's where a lot of the clips you see on YouTube came from. Unlike other countries where they would take the original broadcast and attach subtitles to them, Challenge took a different approach. They cut down the original episodes to fit within a 20-minute format, even cutting out the skits and world building. On top of that, the episodes were shown out of order, with some of the games from the original not even making it to the UK version. I assume it was to make it more palpable for general audiences, and to their credit it did work. Since the show was edited so sporadically, they needed a commentator to help communicate the insanity the British public were about to experience. So they hired actor and radio personality Craig Charles. A lot of people know him for his iconic role as the intergalactic space bum Dave Lister, from the sci-fi sitcom Red Dwarf, though I personally know him for his most esteemed role as Captain Butler. Nobody's watched that show, what am I talking about? When Craig was brought in, he actually had no idea what he was getting himself into. The commentary you hear from him is actually his first genuine reaction to the footage.
There was no script or anything like that. We went to the pub around about midday, had a few pints, and then went back to the TV studio, put the cassette into the VHS into the player, picked up the microphone, and then just commentated over the edit. Yeah. And that's the way we made it. Yeah.
Craig's wit and off-the-cuff commentary perfectly complements the show's own brand of absurdity. He approaches it in the style of a sports commentator who's pretty much commentating over a local sports event. It's kind of wild some of the stuff he got away with saying at the time, as there were moments where you can tell that even he's taken by surprise by the events unfolding before him. Grabbing an actor and making him commentate over a show without giving him any proper context is actually something Takeshi Kitano himself would do, so I have to give Challenge props for taking that approach even if it wasn't their intention. So I do wonder if Craig was on his coke binge arc while recording this. It would make a lot of sense with how well he takes a lot of it in stride.
Half an hour of Oriental mayhem and disaster. We're still not really sure what it's all about.
I see that we in the UK also have no idea why they're trying to take the castle. I have very fond memories watching this show with my dad. We'd laugh at the ridiculous challenges while cheering on the contestants. At the time, we were the only household in the neighbourhood who had cable TV, so we would have friends over to watch shows and movies they normally wouldn't get on regular television. So we would tape episodes of Takeshi's Castle, and we invite the neighbourhood over to have a massive watch party. It goes to show that despite this being a different and watered down version of the original, it retains the spirit of fun, which I think is what's most important. Since the start of its broadcast in 2002, it ran on repeats for the rest of the 2000s, making it one of Challenge TV's most popular shows. It even got a bit of a remaster in 2009 where they fixed and updated a few of the visuals. The UK version garnered its very own dedicated fanbase that Craig Charles himself affectionately dubbed them as Keshi Heads. They eventually created their own website as a hub for fans to gather and talk about this beloved show. While it's not as in-depth as the aforementioned Takeshi's Castle History Museum, they still host a lot of resources for newcomers who want to learn more about the show. They even came up with their own Takeshi's Castle cards game, which looks like a lot of fun, and is probably just as punishing as the board games. Just to give some perspective on how popular this show was in the British Isles, I'd like to bring you back to the year 2012. This year would mark the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth II. Celebrations would occur over the month of June, but that wasn't the only event that was happening at the time. Over the first week of June, Challenge TV aired a massive Takeshi's Castle marathon to celebrate 10 years of the show's debut on UK television, much to the joy of fans all over Britain. However, what no one saw coming was how much attention it garnered. On the second day of the marathon, the words Takeshi's Castle became a worldwide trend on Twitter, even ranking higher than that of the Queen's Jubilee celebrations, which were broadcasted on the very same day. As it turns out, even the Queen wasn't safe from Count Takeshi's reign. This event also caught the attention of several Japanese news outlets, with even the country the show originated from being pleasantly surprised by this outpouring of love towards their iconic show. Funnily enough, that wasn't the only thing that happened during that year. To rewind a bit, in 2010, the Keshi Heads launched an online campaign with the goal of getting Challenge to produce a brand new series of Takeshi's Castle, using the Japanese footage that never made it over to the UK. 2 years later, on December 13th, 2012, Challenge announced that they would air new episodes in 2013 under the title of Takeshi's Castle Rebooted. They even managed to bring back Hayato Tani himself to record some new footage for the event. However, there is one element that was sorely missing, and that is Craig Charles. Despite showing interest in returning, Challenge decided to go in a different direction.
Everyone's going on about Keshi at the moment, aren't they? It's because they've made a few new ones without me. They've got Dick and Dom in. Yeah, I know. They asked me if I wanted to make a few more, and I said yes. And then they went away and never contacted me again. The next minute, they've made some Takeshi's Castle with someone else. Maybe I was too expensive or something, I don't know.
Dick and Dom were a comedic duo that presented children's television programs. Yeah, that's all I have. I really don't know much about them outside of that, and I have no idea why Challenge went with them. The so-called reboot was a massive flop, which caused fans to leave negative comments on Challenge's social media accounts. What's even more condemning is that after the reboot ended its run, the classic episodes featuring Craig's commentary returned on rotation and pretty much dominated the ratings the moment they were rebroadcasted, going to show that if you give fans what they want, they will come. In 2017, Comedy Central took a stab at it themselves, this time using footage from Takeshi's Castle, Thailand, with commentary done by comedian Jonathan Ross. So I guess we're dealing with an adaptation of an adaptation. As much as I like Ross, I felt his commentary fell flat. There just wasn't much energy to it, especially when compared to Craig Charles. You might as well go back and watch the original Thai version itself. I know that they eventually started rotating commentators, but at that point it never felt the same. What Challenge TV had was lightning in a bottle, and not even they could replicate the same success. Unfortunately, there hasn't been any physical media releases of this version, as far as I know anyway. I don't really watch TV anymore, so I have no idea if it's still being shown on Challenge or if Challenge is still even around, but you can actually find episodes of this show online. As mentioned before, you'll find a lot of them on YouTube itself, and if you want to have a bit of a laugh, especially with a few mates, I highly recommend watching it. Now before I move on, I'm not going to forget my America bros out there, because the US also has their own version of Takeshi's Castle called MXC, Most Extreme Elimination Challenge, which aired on Spike TV. Much like the UK version, they also had their own take on the show. Because they couldn't have access to the original audio due to legal reasons, they opted to create an original story with everyone on screen being dubbed over. Pete Takeshi and Sonamana Higashi would become sport commentators, Vic Romano and Kenny Blankenship, both of them having their own personalities and quirks. This time, contestants are split into teams as they compete against each other to see who can conquer the most physical challenges, with Vic and Kenny reacting to all of their failures. I'm not too familiar with this version, but for what it's worth, I think it works very well. I really appreciate them keeping some of the skits in from the original show, and it still kept the same sense of fun as the other versions have. I guess the only downside is that we don't get a final showdown at the castle, which is probably why they couldn't use the original title, Takeshi's Castle, but I have to commend their creativity considering the limitations. It was just recently that MXC saw a physical release on Blu-ray, and yes, you can watch this as well on YouTube. By now, I hope you understand how much of an impact this silly show has made on the culture worldwide. If not for this show, we wouldn't have known about Japanese variety programming, as well as its many wacky iterations. But as Takeshi Mania was hitting the world in the 2000s, what about the country the show first originated from? Well, in 2005 there was in fact a small revival of Takeshi's Castle. It was a short one-off special to commemorate the 50th anniversary of TBS. It was broadcasted live as contestants took part in two of the most iconic games featured on the show, Skipping Stones and Bridge Ball. They even managed to bring back the original cast for the occasion. Even Takeshi Kitano made time out of his busy filming schedule to take part in this. Hey, wait a minute. For Japanese audiences, this was assumed to be the last time they see anything new from Takeshi's Castle, but little did they, and the rest of the world know, this show will make its glorious return many years later.
He took my leg!
While Takeshi's Castle has been off the air, its influence has been felt throughout pop culture. Variety shows that came after also decided to include their own wacky game segments, such as Brainwall from the variety show Tonorizuro no Minasan no Okage Deshita, or in English, The Tunnels Thanks to Everyone, which ended up getting adapted in the UK as Hole in the Wall. I'm sure you've also seen clips of Japanese people biting at random objects to see if they're chocolate, but the most famous example would have to be Gaki no Tsukai, where every episode seems to be whatever punishment game the hosts feel brave enough to endure. But in the West, we also had our own share of wacky games that were inspired by the likes of Takeshi's Castle and Sasuke. As I mentioned before, we in the UK had Hole in the Wall, which had contestants twist and contort their bodies to fit the titular hole in the wall. If you don't fit through, you'll be pushed into the depths of hell. Meanwhile, the US had Wipeout, which had a 4-stage obstacle course set at a water park, where contestants would bounce around and drown for our entertainment. As you can probably tell, they drew a lot of influences from Japanese game shows, so much so that TBS themselves raised an eyebrow and decided to file a copyright infringement lawsuit accusing them of copycatting their current golden child, Sasuke. However, it was eventually settled out of court. And yes, the UK got their own version of the show called Total Wipeout. However, it doesn't just end with television, because video games have also taken some notes from Takeshi's Castle, the most famous example being Fall Guys Ultimate Knockout, developed by British game studio Mediatonic. They took the Battle Royale format that was popular at the time and placed it in a fun and goofy environment where players would fight each other to reach the end of an obstacle course. Unlike Takeshi's Castle, where they had contestants attempt a challenge one at a time, the game decided that every course would involve large groups. In turn, they created original games to account for this. It was released in 2020 just as the pandemic reared its ugly head, but it gave gamers a nice bit of escapism, though unfortunately that was all it was. It didn't have much longevity, and eventually went free to play exclusively on Epic Games. Of course, it didn't stop Chinese-based video game studio MiHoYo to make their own version of Fall Guys as a side activity in their gacha game Zenless Zone Zero. Insert joke about Chinese bootlegs here. ZZZ is the only MiHoYo game I actually enjoyed, so I did manage to give it a shot, and it's alright for what it was. It's pretty much a watered down version of Fall Guys, but while the public were heavily fixated to the world of gaming, we were quickly blindsided by the news that, somehow, Count Takeshi has returned. What? That's right. In 2023, Takeshi's Castle finally returned to our screens through Amazon's streaming service, Prime Video. Now a whole new generation will get to experience the suffering of their ancestors who fought in the Great Takeshi War. After 34 years, the Great Demonic Castle has re-emerged into the land of the Rising Sun. General Kimura, played by voice actor Subaru Kimura, is tasked with leading the charge against the newly reformed Takeshi's army, but this time it isn't as simple as it was all those decades ago. As it turns out, Takeshi's army have built 3 special fortresses that are designed to protect the castle, so now Kimura's army has to fight harder than ever if they want to have a chance at storming the legendary castle. In this daring new revival, contestants will fight it out with challenging obstacles both new and old for a chance to once again defeat Count Takeshi, and win themselves the prize of 1 million yen. But not everything is as it appears to be, as General Kimura seems to be hiding a few secrets of his own. The 2023 revival is a perfect example on how to bring back your legacy IP. They pretty much improved upon everything while showing respect for the original. This time there's a more developed narrative involved with fully fleshed out characters, though it is done in jest, typical of a Takeshi Kitano project. What's even better is that it's accessible worldwide for anyone who owns an Amazon Prime account. Now let's cross our fingers for a physical release. Not only do we get the return of Count Takeshi and General Tani, but we're introduced to an array of new characters. Comedians Osamu Shitara and Yuki Himura play the Count's new advisors. The chemistry is what helps carry the show until the eventual return of Count Takeshi. Their energy is actually quite infectious, and it feels like you're watching the madness unfold right next to them, as they're trying their best to keep the castle's defences intact. Our plucky general, Subaru Kimura, is a great addition too, and his dynamic with General Tani is really hilarious. I won't go into spoilers of course, but Kimura's motivation for attacking the castle is a great subversion of Tani's, and makes for a hilarious twist towards the end of the show. Kimura really makes this role his own, and you can tell he's having a blast on set. I personally knew him from the tokusatsu show Kamen Rider Revice as the lovable demon Vice. He has gotten a bit of hot water for wearing blackface, so if the life of a general isn't working out for him, he can at least have comfort knowing that he's now eligible to run for office in Canada. Not only does this revival come with a few new games, they once again updated the old ones. And don't worry, they didn't update them for the quote-unquote modern audience. In fact, they made them a whole lot more difficult. And come to think of it, it looks like they fixed the side gap in the wall with a staircase. You may as well just roll out the red carpet while you're at it. What's even more surprising is that this revival also had a British adaptation. Now with all this fanfare, you're probably wondering if they brought back Craig Charles for this special occasion. Well, unfortunately the answer is no. Instead we got Ramesh Raghunathan and Tom Davis? Yeah, I have no idea who they are. Sorry. But this wasn't just a simple revival. This actually feels like a celebration, not just of Takeshi's Castle itself, but of Japanese pop culture as a whole. If you're an enjoyer of Japanese media, there's a lot of familiar faces that pop up, from comedians to YouTubers, pop idols, gravure models, walking memes, and Japan's own brand of lolcow. Those who competed in the original show made a return as well, this time bringing their families along with them, because nothing brings families together than to see a family member drown in mud. It's also really cool to see the winners of Sasuke take part in this too, including Morimoto Yusuke himself, who at the time is a software engineer. So once again, it doesn't matter what your background is, you're welcome to try or die trying. Even Takeshi's Castle mega fan, Joshua Murphy, had the opportunity to compete as well, and he didn't even expect them to accept his audition. He originally signed up with hopes of getting the attention of the production team for a chance to do an interview, but instead he got to experience the real thing in person, which I think is a far better outcome. While the original show felt like a group of kids play fighting in the mud, this feels like a festival celebrating a time where being a kid was great. Since the world was just recovering from the pandemic of 2020, this was a show that was very much needed to raise everyone's spirits. But it's also a bittersweet reminder that we'll never get a show as special as this one, which is actually what led me to making this video. There has been other creators who've covered this show before me, and I recommend checking their videos out as well, because I think it's a good reminder of how important shows like these are in the realm of entertainment. Takeshi's Castle was a game show that focuses on fun and fun alone. It reminds us of a simpler time where family-friendly programming wasn't mired with forced political agendas, tone-deaf moral grandstanding, or culture war nonsense. It was a show that brought everyone to the couch to enjoy a few minutes of escapism, to remind ourselves that it's okay to have a bit of fun once in a while. Whenever you're having a bad day or just want a little bit of joy in your life, always remember that Takeshi's Castle will always be waiting for you and your friends at Midoriyama, always at the ready for the next invasion. If you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. Sorry it's been a very long time. That's just life for you, and as you can probably tell, I'm putting a little bit more effort into my videos, which does take up some time. I actually had a different video planned, but considering the overall mood this year, I felt this was a subject that was more fitting. I would like to hear what you guys think. Maybe share some memories of your time watching the show too. If you'd like to see more Takeshi's Castle content from me, I actually recorded a reaction video with my friend a long time ago where he was experiencing the show for the first time. I'll be sure to link it down below, and if you'd like to know more about Kitano's film career, please check out my Kikajiro video as well. As usual, I appreciate it, I appreciate you, and I hope you'll grab a few buddies to watch this masterpiece of a game show. Next time on Doc Discovers, I'll take a look at a comedian who was invited by his mates to play golf for the very first time. But little did he know, his friends decided to prank him by teaching him a set of fake rules just to see how far they can gaslight him before he catches on. However, much to their shock, he was so excited to take part, he actually believed every single rule they gave him. So they have no choice but to continue playing the whole game with these ridiculous rules they themselves set up. But until then, I think I'm going to head down and enjoy the festivities. It's actually the one time I can enjoy the festival exclusive blue mango ice cream. So I better get down there before they're all sold out and... Oh? Is someone actually going to make it to the top? Oh, no. Some bloke's pants got pulled down. And it's clipped. Nice.
Thanks for stopping by. If you enjoyed the vid, please leave a like and comment below. It really helps.